machine does work too. All right, so quick recap over what actually happened here. And there's some that you guys need to know, and there's some that's really honestly none of your business. But we'll just cover a few things. As for the abandoned property, there is a legal proceeding to go through to declare it abandoned and make it officially yours. The nice sweet old lady, she did call the cops twice and say, get this thing off my property, and they said, we can't do that because we get your side of the story. You need to go through court. And I think what's involved is a couple documented letters and phone calls saying that get your stuff off my property. I think in our area you might have to put something in the newspaper, just like a broadened newspaper, an ad saying get your stuff off my property. After that, you take your proof that you did the steps needed, you take it to a lawyer's office, you have somebody sign an affidavit saying yes, you've proven that you've tried to contact the owner and he hasn't moved it. Now it is officially yours. Technically it still wasn't hers because she never went to court. It was still the original owner who I talked to. I've worked with him before and I know him very well. We've been getting parts and whatever together. And this is not my machine either. It will not stay here. I got a few small jobs to do with it and then it's going off to the next place. The fuel that was in there, yes, fuel has a shelf life of 30 days or three months tops. Fuel isn't what it used to be, but it still burns. I don't know what else to say. Yes, you change your fuel. I don't care. It wasn't my machine. I didn't have enough jerry cans to empty that whole tank. The whole tank was full. But I took your advice. I took all the fuel out of it. Now we're gonna put some fresh fuel in it. I was low on fuel for the forklift and my pressure washer, and the F350 is hard on fuel too. So I put the fuel in there just so you guys can rest easy that it's no longer in the man lift. But we got it running from here. I don't know whether we're gonna fix it properly or not. I don't know what's gonna happen to this. So right now I have a bill for the owner for just my time and for getting the machine off the property. So it was in a tight spot. He probably could have got a tow truck in there to get it out, but it would have been awkward. I don't know where the septic was and whatever else. Because you guys have watched the video and you guys have been great, this video is done really well. All my time to actually fix it, I'm gonna get him to give it back to the lady as a storage fee, and then we're done. I am not any way, shape, or form owner of this thing. I'm a mechanic who fixed it, and that's all you need to know. As to why it was left there, what happened, there's a lot more to the story than just one guy leaving it, but honestly, it's none of your business, so get over it. Enjoy the video of him fixing it. We could have done a few other things with it. We've had some recommendations for diesel swaps, and as much as I'd be up for that, we have a lot of projects on the go and I just want to get this thing done out of it. We're on to much cooler things. We've got much better stuff to do with our time. I like getting old equipment running and lots of good stuff coming up. I hope you learned something, just kind of a step-by-step diagnosis, but it was honestly just me fooling around on a Saturday afternoon, and then it kind of ended up into 1 million views. So yeah, anyway, I'm gonna go fix some shingles, take some gypsy moth out, and then there's only one thing left to say. Here we go. All right, since there was quite a bit of interest in this machine, probably should get it running properly. Now, I've had some experience with running these. I ran a construction company for a while. I owned a 67-foot snorkel, a 60-foot Terex, and a Genie scissor lift. So I've fixed random stuff on them before, but I've never formally been trained on these. I don't want this machine. I have no use for this machine. And honestly, this machine isn't worth that much. After 10 years old, they need to have x-rays on all of their welds, which is quite the process. You have to bring the machine somewhere, pay big money for it just to have it certified to be on site. The hoses get soft and cracked and blow, and these things really don't have much resale after 10 years. It's a much better idea just to rent one. When it breaks, you call up, say fix it now, or get me another one, rather than having a machine down, losing a man to try and figure it out. Won't start in the winter. The fact that it's been painted in certain spots means that it's covering up rust. Rust is never a good idea when you're holding people up in the air like that. The tires are starting to get cracked. They're supposed to be foam filled. The tires need to be replaced. And honestly, I have some use for it for about 3 days and then I'm done with it. So I'm not keeping the machine. I'm not going through anything to try and keep the machine. I just want to fix it, use it, get it off the property. That's where we're gonna start from here. I got a new fuel pump. This is a Delphi 43 PSI, good to go. Fuel filter. Really want to thank you guys for all your input. There's a couple things that I did miss. I thought that that was a regulator for the alternator. It was actually a way to isolate the batteries. So you have two batteries, which is why there's a pile of cables going to the battery side. One would run the engine if you have some dummy in the basket and the engine quits and he cranks and cranks and cranks until the battery's dead. There's another battery that's completely separate, which runs your auxiliaries, which is just that starter with a gear pump on it, just to bring you back down again. It won't control the steering and it won't control the moving. So you're kind of euchred to move the machine, but the point is to bring you back down again. When those hoses blow, there is no way to get you back down again. There's safeties in there to protect the people up in there. So if that's why these machines aren't very desirable, because when those hydraulic hoses blow, basically you got to climb down the boom, which is not suggested, but I've seen done. Basically you need to get another machine up top so you can climb baskets over while you're tied off safely. So that being said, it needs crank signal, and it needs charging, and it needs an oil pressure. And many of you sent me the same manual that I found that was a diesel version of this machine, and those have different electronics than the gas powered one does. But I was able to find, thanks to your recommendations, that it's a PSI engine management system on this 4-cylinder GM. We were able to find the wiring diagram for the engine outside of the machine, so it was another way to try and find that. We'll try the fuel pump and we'll try and make sure that it's charging and then see where we go from there. Okay, as a bunch of you noticed, this wire was fried right away, but not our issue. This is a multi-battery isolator, and what that does is this is the wire from the alternator, which I've loosened already because I'm going to take it off, but then it powers these two terminals and they go to two separate batteries. One goes to the starter here, which goes back to the heavy cable and charges the battery. This other one goes to your secondary battery for your auxiliaries, and this one was just too light of a gauge, I think, and they put a shitty battery on it. This thing got hot and just melted everything. Not our issue, but it does need to be charging, I guess, for it to run, and I think that's how it knows that it's running, is if it's charging. So we will add a charger to it just in case. It's hard to tell whether it's charging or not if it's not running. So kind of a dumb setup. And then this is the oil pressure sensor that just needs to go to ground. So this wire broke off. This is my sending unit. I know that when I disconnected, the gauge stopped working. There is oil in there. I did obviously check that. And I undid my wiring here real quick and just undid what I did at the lady's house. Let's fix this, get some grounds to here, fix that. Actually, I could just put all these terminals on this one and that one would act the exact same, so let's do that. And disconnect this wire, hook these two together, throw a battery in it, and fire it up. Here we go. I already got the fuel pump hooked up properly to the wires that it was. Now, if you remember, it was hooked up to a ground directly, and then the positive wire was hooked up. So I am not getting power to the fuel pump when it turns on. I hot wired it as well when I did it. I just put the ground right to the battery. So I started just kind of cleaning up the wiring here. A lot of issues. Gave it a little tug. This wire came out of this relay, and you can see the plug is still in there, and chased this ground down, and it popped right out of that holder. You see that there? So that could have been it. It's the ground that turns these relays on. So that's this ground here, this wire right here. And this relay in turn turns other relays on. I thought it was this relay, so I swapped this relay already, but I'm gonna have to chase a bunch of this wiring. I tried the propane, checked to see if there's power there, and this plug came right out. So this wiring is a mess. If this is the way the wiring is from factory, that's really sad. None of these are shrink loomed. They're the cheap connectors all together, and that leads to nothing but headaches. Took the switch in the house just to do some research on it. 5-pound sensor, and this blue wire is actually for the tack, and the red wire is normally closed, so when you get oil pressure it takes power away from this one, which is weird because this is your common. So I just pulled this out of this relay, and this is the power wire that comes from the computer that would turn this relay on and complete the ground going back into the PSI unit. I imagine this ground is what turns on the grounds to the injectors and to the fuel pump across my fingers. Look at this. It's never been crimped. This terminal was never crimped to this wire. So from factory, it was only this rubber that was holding this wire in place. I bet they've had a nightmare with this thing. And you can see somebody's been in here before. That wasn't me. Where you start shaving off the wire, you take the loom off so you stick your multimeter in there. So this was an issue before, when all they had to do was peel this rubber back and go right to the terminal right there to check it with a multimeter. Instead, you damage the wire, which makes it corrode later and causes problems for the owner later. Stop being idiots. I don't even have to get a new terminal. I can just stick my wire right back in there, pop it back in again. So here we go. All right, so it's not looking good. The fact that the plugs have been removed and just spade connectors been put in place. There's butt connectors absolutely everywhere that are not in good shape. There's only 2 bolts holding the computer in place, and it's not sealed either from up top there. Started tracing wires back here. Somebody's peeled wires back in here already too. You can see the wire there. I've traced all the wires now. Terminal broken right off the alternator. So I've got good continuity between the sensors and where they enter the PSI box, right on the terminals going in. And right now, it's still not turning the grounds on to the injectors or to the fuel pump in the first place. So I think somebody's kind of jerry-rigged this thing before. From talking to the owner, he only used it that one time. So we can continue trying to get it working the way it's supposed to. Clean up all the wiring that somebody's been into for the last 10-15 years. Clean up the connections, possibly have to buy a computer. Injectors might be clogged, dirty now. The fuel pump. Another thing is we could throw a carburetor on it. And the issue with that is when you step on the pedal, you need to have it rev up. So it needs to idle at a certain speed, and then when you step on the pedal to do a function, it's supposed to rev up. With a carburetor on it, the choke isn't going to work well. Starting will be an issue. And the carburetor only runs at 5 psi fuel pump, not the 43. So we could run 2 pumps. One, it will still fire those initial injectors. You hear it fire right away. Then the carburetor could take over. I think for now, we'll just throw a carburetor on it and see what happens. That's the easiest thing. Or we just get rid of the engine altogether and put a diesel in it. Yeah. Okay, so before we start getting into this, I did try the propane, but same issue where it won't turn the propane on. There's still an electronic issue there, and I didn't mess with the propane too much because from my experience in working on forklifts and having my own scissor lift and that, when I did need it to run on propane, if you don't use it all the time, the diaphragms get hard, they leak, and then the converter where it changes it from a liquid to a gas acts up, and it's nothing but issues. I spent about 40 minutes on the propane, and that was enough of that. So we took this off. Okay, so this is the throttle plate. You can see that at the bottom. It's actuated electronically, and that was still working properly. That when you stepped on the pedal to do a function, it would rev it up. So it would open up this throttle plate. This is a carburetor off of a 216. This is a 1948. And what I did was I took the throttle plate off of this. Unfortunately, the accelerator pump won't be working, but we'll get it running and see what happens for me. We've got a video on how to make your own gasket, which basically you just lay it on top and then take a ball peen and just tap it, and the sharp edges will cut you a nice gasket. And then you can lay the gasket on top and see which bolt holes line up, and these ones line up almost perfect. So these holes were not tapped. They went straight through, but I could tap them just right. And if I hold it right there, I still have a lip everywhere. Should be enough to create the seal we need to create some vacuum to pull the fuel through the jets. 216 would have been a 6-cylinder, and I think they put out 70 horse, something like that. Probably slightly less than the 3-liter GM. Wouldn't you know it? The intake is the same size. I'm just pointing in the wrong direction. So I'll get a little elbow, and the air filter should work too. It's pretty funny, really. Let's see if it works. All right, got my fitting brazed. I've got the carb in place. I've got the computer back up there, just whatever. Won't be charging, but let's see if it fires up. We got fuel. Kind of nervous. Let's go see if we got any leaks. Looking good. Almost. Well, that sounds all right. That's kind of funny. Now let's see if the function enable works, because it has to rev up and not die when we get it to do stuff. It worked! If nothing else, it's just funny. Charging says it's still working, so I guess we'll drive it around for a little bit. And I just want to say that, do you listen to that purr? That's still on that old fuel. I got a pile of comments saying, change the fuel, change the fuel, change the fuel. It was kind of a Saturday afternoon thing. I didn't really feel like getting soaked in gas and whatever, and I wanted to see if it would run. It obviously does run. Now, gas has a shelf life of like 3 months, if that. It doesn't mean it's not going to burn a year later. It's not great, but it still runs. So just settle down, internet. We got it running. We'll put some more fresh fuel in it after we run this tank empty. I don't want to waste $1 a liter. But yeah, here we go.